Okay, let's go to Doha now, where the Qatari Prime Minister and US Secretary of State are speaking. Let's listen in.
Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, I welcome you here in Doha. We meet today within critical circumstances with the escalation in the occupied Israeli Palestinian territories. And in Israel, we had deep conversation in this regard, and we discussed the political, humanitarian complications of this situation. We have reiterated Qatar's situation regarding hitting and targeting the civilians, women and children, and the collective punishment that is not acceptable under any circumstances. And these condemnation must go to anyone who is involved in these matters. We need to work hard in order to reach a sort of a ceasefire in order to stop the bloodshed and to avoid a circle of violence that the peoples of the region will pay the price high. The priorities of Qatar within the diplomatic approach is to seek a ceasefire, protect the civilians, release the captives, and to work hard in order not to spread violence in the region, because this will have bad consequences. We also exchange our viewpoints regarding humanitarian corridors to keep the assistances and aid reaching the Palestinians, particularly within the deterioration of the situation in Gaza Strip. It is a disaster what we can see in Gaza Strip, and shortage of basic needs, no electricity because of the bombardment. And we all understand that the situation is very tough, and we all have to exert all possible efforts with alliance and partners, particularly the United States of America, in order to calm the situation and to not to increase the more casualties within civilians. The only way to reach a peaceful solution is to open all contact channels with all partners and concerned parties through cooperation. We appreciate the regional, international efforts being made to de-escalate the situation. Qatar deeply believes that mediation, dialogue are very important, and this is part of our foreign policy. And Qatar has made a lot of successes through dialogue with other parties, and Qatar is now having a great position as a partner in achieving and bringing peace. Qatar is committed to be a partner in the peace process, in making peace, and we need not anything that will hit the good reputation of Qatar through other parties. We confirm that the lack of a last and fair solution will have bad consequences, and the international community must press towards the fair solution of the Palestinian cause within the Arab Initiative that insisted on a Palestinian state on the borders of 1967 with East Jerusalem as the capital of the state, and the Palestinians must get their legitimate right. We look forward to working more and more with our partners, with the US and other partners in order to escalate the situation in the Palestinian territories and in Israel for the peace and security in the region, and peace be upon you.
Well, good evening. Let me start by expressing my gratitude to the Emir and to the Prime Minister, my friend Mohammed, for, as always, very productive discussions. Qatar has been a very close partner to the United States on a broad range of issues that are crucial to both of our countries and to this region, from working together on evacuating Americans, Afghans, and others from Afghanistan, to cooperating very closely in responding to humanitarian emergencies like the devastating earthquakes in Turkey and in Syria. We're meeting today at what is a difficult but also consequential time for the region in the wake of Hamas's appalling attack. It killed more than 1,300 Israelis, at least 27 American citizens, and people from more than 30 countries. The United States and Qatar share the goal of preventing this conflict from spreading. We discussed in detail our efforts to prevent any act, state or non-state, from creating a new front in this conflict. We're also working intensively together to secure the release of hostages, including American citizens, being held by Hamas in Gaza. I'm grateful for the urgency that Qatar is bringing to this effort. I had an opportunity to meet yesterday with the families of some of those being held hostage by Hamas. Their anguish is profound. They're desperate to bring their loved ones home, and we are working urgently on that effort. We're doing that with Qatar, and we're doing that with allies and partners across the region. As Israel continues to respond to Hamas's devastating attacks, the United States will ensure that it has what it needs to defend its people. Secretary of Defense Austin was in Israel today, doing just that, working closely with the Israelis to make sure that we're providing them what they need, and we'll be able to do that on an ongoing basis. At the same time, we're in constant communication with Israeli officials and with multilateral and international organizations, humanitarian organizations, including the United Nations agencies, including the ICRC, to get aid to civilians in Gaza. As I said yesterday in Tel Aviv, Israel has the right, indeed it has the obligation, to defend its people and to try to ensure that Hamas can never repeat what it's done. We continue to discuss with Israel the importance of taking every possible precaution to avoid harming civilians. We recognize that many Palestinian families in Gaza are suffering through no fault of their own, and that Palestinian civilians have lost their lives. We mourn the loss of every innocent life, Israeli, Palestinian, Jew, Christian, Muslim, as well as civilians of every faith and every nationality who've been killed. Let's not lose sight of why this is happening. Israel is conducting operations in Gaza because Hamas carried out terrorist attacks that killed, in the most horrific ways, 1,300 of its people. Hamas terrorists slaughtered, raped, mutilated, tortured, burned innocent civilians, from babies to the elderly, men, women, boys, and girls. Now, efforts to get humanitarian aid into Gaza are complicated by the fact that Hamas continues to use innocent civilians as human shields and is reportedly blocking roads to prevent Palestinians from moving to southern Gaza out of harm's way. We know the humanitarian situation is urgent. We're actively engaged with partners, including Qatar, to get aid to those who need it. Your Excellency, thank you again for today's very, very good discussions and for all the work that our countries have done together. Thank you.
نفتح الآن المجال للأسئلة. السؤال الأول موجه من التلفزيون العربي.
A question from the journalist. First question to the Qatari Prime Minister. Media reports talk about an agreement that has been agreed to freeze around $6 billion of Iran here in Qatar. A question to Mr. Blinken. Have you heard, you and the American administration, that the numbers of casualties in Gaza are more than 1,500? Third of these casualties and victims are children, according to reports and according to the UNICEF. My question is clear to you. What will the United States do, being a democracy advocate in the world? What will you do in order not to kill another child in Gaza? Regarding the media reports about freezing Iranian funds in Qatar, the state of Qatar is always committed to any agreement, and every steps must be done through consultations with other partners. The fund, the money here in Qatar is there,
unless all the conditions
and
of the agreement are fulfilled, and we should focus on our
Qatar will focus
and that is to reduce tension
at the priorities
and create a situation of calm and put an end to the current war waged against our brothers in Gaza and reach
we need not to do anything that will escalate the situation in the region.
Thank you for the question. A few things. As I said just a moment ago, and I'll repeat it. Israel has both the right and even the obligation to defend its people and to do everything it can to ensure that what happened last Saturday never happens again. At the same time, the way Israel does this matters. The way any democracy must deal with such a situation matters. And to that end, we discussed with the Israelis, urged the Israelis to use every possible precaution to avoid harm to civilians. It's also important to remember the fundamental issue that makes this so complicated. As I said again a moment ago, Hamas uses civilians as human shields. It puts them in places where they will be in danger. It puts them in places where they're used in effect to try to protect Hamas officials or their equipment or infrastructure. Civilians, of course, should not be the target of military operations. They are not the target of Israeli operations. They are very deliberately the target of Hamas's action. I mentioned as well that we're very actively engaged with UN relief agencies, with the ICRC, with others, to address the acute humanitarian needs of people in Gaza, to protect them from harm and make sure that they have the ability to get what they need. We need to ensure, for example, that there are safe areas in Gaza. For civilians, we're working through the details on that, and more to be said in the days ahead, but that's a priority for us. We're discussing this with the Israeli government. We're discussing it with others in the region.
السؤال الثاني موجه من قناة الجزيرة.
السلام عليكم. علي الوزير محمد الجاسم مع قناة الجزيرة. السؤال متعلق
The question is related to the core of the contacts, recent contacts since the crisis in Gaza. We have seen that Qatar is doing well in this regard, contacted so many countries, Iran, the United States, Jordan, France, and other countries. What is the core of the recent contacts, and what are these contacts based on? Since the crisis, His Highness the Emir of Qatar made a lot of contacts, and I also had contacts with some of my counterparts. We need to listen the escalation, and we need to stop this war, and we need to find the humanitarian corridors for the aid and assistances to reach Gaza, and to see the cause of the civilian captives. We work with our partners, and we hope they will go back to their families. The contact and consultations of Qatar are based on finding solution to this crisis and not to escalate the crisis and not to spread the conflicts and not to find other fronts being involved. The priorities are to stop the war and to deliver the assistances and aid to the needy people and the captives to be returned to their families.
Third question from Reuters.
Thank you. Sheikh Mohammed, given the condemnation from the world on Hamas attack, Is Qatar considering shutting down Hamas bureau? Are you prepared to ask the leadership to leave if your Western allies demand you to do so? And Mr. Secretary, have you asked Qatar to shut down the Hamas office? And if I may, Mr. Secretary, yesterday and just now, you said Israel has a right to defend itself, but you added that how it does that mattered. And you talked about a standard that democracies should strive for even when it's difficult to do so. Today, Israel ordered residents of Gaza City to leave and move south, something UN Palestinian envoy just called a crime against humanity. The translation wasn't great, so the gentleman before me might have asked something similar, but let me push you a little bit more on this. How does that order square with that standard you mentioned and also international law? Does the United States support this relocation? And since you had a conversation with Prime Minister Netanyahu, did you give your blessing for this move? Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Well, regarding your question about Hamas political office in Doha, right now, actually, this office, since it started, it's been used as a way of communicating and bringing peace and calm to the region, not to instigate any war. And this is the purpose of that office, as long as we are keeping the communication open right now and focusing on putting an end for this conflict, and this is useful. That will remain our main focus these days. Actually, now our key focus for us in the state of Qatar, and I believe the United States sharing with us this objective, is how to put an end for this conflict, how to de-escalate, how to create a humanitarian corridor, and how to get the hostages back safe.
Amara, first, regarding the first part of your question, let me start by saying, and I mentioned this before, but I want to repeat it. I really thank Qatar for the work that they're doing to try to help secure the release of hostages. This is something that we deeply appreciate. I know that other countries do as well, and it's something that we're actively pursuing. I've also been making it clear in all of my conversations throughout this trip that there can be no more business as usual with Hamas. Murdering babies, burning families to death, taking little children as hostages. These are unconscionable acts of brutality. Every country in our judgment needs to condemn these actions, needs to hold them accountable, and we will continue to make that clear. When it comes to providing for civilians in Gaza, both ensuring that they can be out of harm's way and that they can have access to the support that they need, the humanitarian assistance, the food, the medicine, the water. Our focus now is on helping to create safe zones, and we're doing that with the leading international organizations. We're doing that engaged with Israel, and we're working with other countries to that end. So that's where our focus is. We think this is the best way to make sure that civilians who are caught in a crossfire of Hamas's making can be safe and receive the assistance they need. Thank you.
السؤال الأخير موجه من بلومبرج.
Mr. Secretary, I know the situation in Israel is highly charged and very fluid, but are you worried about the medium and long-term consequences of what's unfolding in Gaza? Are you worried that Israel may be simply retaliating in a fury because of the horrendous nature of these attacks and might not have a medium or long-term plan? And secondly, I'm wondering, how worried are you about a second front in this war? Iran and Hezbollah have already made threats of opening this new front if attacks on civilians or an Israeli blockade of Gaza continues. What would the U.S. response be if Hezbollah ramps up its own attacks, for instance, in response to a ground invasion? And Sheikh Mohammed, the U.S. and Israel are both struggling with this tragic and fluid hostage situation that the Secretary was talking about. and have looked for Qatar to help navigate it. Can you tell us about your engagements with Hamas? And are you optimistic about getting these people back alive, given reports that some of them may have already died in Israeli strikes on Gaza? And secondly, there have been rising criticism and protests across the Arab world as Israel's retaliation continues. What's your view of how Israel is conducting its military response? And are you worried about the potential? Are you also worried about the potential for medium and long-term consequences of what's happening? Thank you.
Ian, thank you very much. First part of the question. No country can tolerate having a terrorist group come in, slaughter its people in the most unconscionable ways, and live like that. What Israel is doing is not retaliation. What Israel is doing is defending the lives of its people and, as I said, trying to make sure that this cannot happen again. And I think any country faced with what Israel has suffered would likely do the same thing. Imagine if this had happened in the United States. So that's what is happening. Of course, it's important to think about, as one might put it, the day after and where this goes. And I believe that is very much a part of Israel's thinking as well as our own and the thinking of many other countries in the region. Because one thing is for sure, we can't go back to the status quo that allowed this to happen in the first place. So that has to be part of the thinking, and it is. But the immediate focus, again, is on making sure that Israelis are protected, defended, and that, again, this can't be allowed to be repeated. With regard to a second front, you put it, yes, this is something that we're very focused on. We have been from day one. We want to make sure that no other country or entity try to take advantage of the situation. The President's been very, very clear about that. He said very starkly that any state or non-state actor considering that should not. Don't do it. And he's backed that up in a number of ways, including, as I've mentioned the other day and is known, deploying our largest aircraft carrier battle group to the Eastern Mediterranean. So that's clearly designed to help ensure that anyone contemplating getting engaged doesn't do it. But beyond that, a big part of my own conversations here throughout this trip, including today, following up the next couple of days, is working with other countries to make sure that they're using their own contacts, their own influence, their own relationships to make that case that no one else should be taking this moment, choose to create more trouble in some other place. I should mention as well that earlier today, I had a very good conversation with President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority. And among other things, the Palestinian Authority is acting effectively to try to ensure that there is security and stability in the West Bank, something that is very much appreciated, and they are working as they've done in the past with Israel to that effect. So in each of these areas, yes, this is a focus, and it's very important that this not expand to other places.
Regarding your question about the progress on the hostages, actually, it's very early to judge with the intensity of the war right now how hopeful we are. But we have to be always hopeful in order to get those hostages back. I think that the progress will be determined in the next few days, hopefully, and we will see if there will be a positive prospect for that. But we are doing our best. Our partners are doing their best in order to get them released safely. On our views on the Israeli response in Gaza, we have seen the amount of devastation that's hit Gaza, which almost now half of it been distracted, and the number of people who've been killed throughout this operation is significant. And we believe that human beings are human beings everywhere, whether they are in Israel or Palestinians. They have the same value. And this is deeply painful for all of us. And we would like to see international law applied here, and also the same standards that we apply to any war being applied in that. We are trying our best in keeping the communication open in order to ensure that the humanitarian suffering doesn't continue, and moving ahead with the humanitarian passages for the aid to be provided to them. We cannot deprive the people in Gaza from electricity, water, and medicine, and like all the means of life. We believe that the situation is very dangerous. On the future prospect of this, the entire situation is very worrying for the entire region, and we believe in the absence of any political horizon and hope for the Palestinians, this issue will keep ongoing, unfortunately. So that's why we need to focus on how the day after will be dealt with and how we can create a political horizon and hope for the Palestinian people.
بهذا يختتم المؤتمر الصحفي لليوم. شكرا معالي رئيس مجلس الوزراء وزير الخارجية وسعادة وزير الخارجية الأمريكي والسادة الحضور. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.